All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Morrison. I am the Associate Adult Services Manager at Cuyahoga Falls Library. And I am so excited to introduce our speaker tonight. He is the author of LeBron James, The Rise of the Star, which I have
Hey,
books here.
hey, don't boo him. He's a nice guy.
And then the Massillon Tigers for Teen for 15.
Oh, you have that one. Good.
And High School Heroes, Stories of
Yes.
Inspiration, Dedication, and Hope.
Yes.
And his newest title will be The Marion Motley Story. He is a professional sports writer, a teacher, and a coach. So I'm so excited to introduce David Lee Morgan Jr.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I wish I could see other people's faces if there's anybody out there.
Yeah, feel free to turn on your video.
Yes, please come in.
You know, you showed
you showed the one LeBron James book, and it's interesting because that book, that book right there, it's in Chinese.
Oh,
and it's at school. I have it at school, but this is a great story. So my publisher, David Gray from Cleveland, and they do a lot of books for you. You probably have a lot of those, like One Tank Trips with Neil Zerker, Superhost, a lot of those Cleveland themed stories. Well, so one day he calls me, he says, David, I got some good news for you. And I was like, okay, what's up? He said, well, there was a publisher from China who saw your book at the Houston airport. And he was in Houston to do a book on Yao Ming. I don't know if you remember him. 7-foot basketball player from China. And China was starting to become really big in basketball because of the Olympics were going to be in China. So he was in Houston to do a book, and he called my publisher and asked if they could publish LeBron James in Chinese. So I said, oh my goodness, I said, I'm going to be a billionaire. Because I mean, there's probably like 1 billion Chinese, right? And, I'm thinking, okay. And he said, well, no, well, and he said, no, he said, we basically allowed them to publish the book in Chinese, but because they don't follow copyright laws from the West, we wouldn't be able to get royalties and anything like that. So it was just a basic flat rate, but it was great professionally because Gray and Company, that book is the only book that's international. So that's a great accomplishment. Yes, it's in Chinese and you open it the other way from the left to right and up and down. Yeah. So that's the story about the LeBron book in Chinese.
So David is going to give an introduction to some of his work, and then we'll have time for questions. And if you'd like to ask David a question, you can either unmute yourself or you can add a question to the chat as well. And I'm here if you have any technical questions. So
okay,
otherwise, I'll just turn it over to you, David.
Well, I'll introduce myself. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'd love to see your face if you would like. If not, I'm glad you're there. It just makes me know that somebody's there and it's not just Emily because I can't tell if anybody's on or not. We do have people, right, Emily?
There's one participant.
There's one participant. It's my aunt. It's my aunt. Hey, auntie, I'll see you later. No, so I was a sports writer for years at the Akron Beacon Journal. And I decided, and I've written a lot of books, and I decided that I had friends who were teachers, and I would go in and talk to they'd say, hey, David, can you come in and talk to my class about writing and the process of writing? So I would go into schools, and the more I did that, the more I realized that this is something I really, really wanted to do. So I went back to school and got my teaching license, and I became an English teacher. And so I've been doing it for the last 7 years. The last 6 years or last 7 years, I was at Massillon Washington High School, and I was a football coach there. And now I was recently hired at Stowe High School, Stowe Monroe Falls. So I'll be starting my first year there. But other than that, writing, it's funny. I tell some of my students in my classes that I would have never thought in a million years that I'd be an author or a writer. I just was never interested in it. Now, that doesn't mean I wasn't a good writer, didn't speak well, or didn't understand English and all of that. It's just I played baseball in high school and in college, so I wanted to be I was an athlete and I just wanted to kind of concentrate on that. So once I got to college, I decided to change my major from criminal justice to professional writing and editing. And so I have a bachelor's in PWE, professional writing and editing. And right now I'm working on my master's. I should be done in the next maybe 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
Master's of Science in Curriculum and Instruction. So that's my background. Been a sports writer for, let's see, over 20 years actually.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's my background.
Yeah.
You don't mind if I?
No, go for it.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
And you worked for Akron Beacon Journal?
Yeah, so I worked for a lot of newspapers, but typically journalists start out like that, so I started out at the Warren Tribune because that's where I was from. And while I was at Youngstown State, I covered Youngstown State athletics for the Warren Tribune.
Okay.
And then when I graduated, I got hired at the Youngstown Vindicator full time. So I was a news writer there, but I always wanted to be in sports, but they didn't have any openings. And I interned in Raleigh, North Carolina for a summer at the News and Observer. And that was great because I covered minor league baseball. So I covered, if you ever watch Bull Durham, I covered the Durham Bulls. And that movie was great because I remember my first day there, they were like, okay, you're going to be covering the Durham Bulls. And I was excited, but not as excited as they thought I should be. So they were like, wait a minute. Okay. They said, don't go cover them. Go rent Bull Durham. So that was my first assignment, rent Bull Durham. So I went and rent Bull Durham, and it's a story of the baseball team in Durham, minor league team. I think Tim, I forget his name, Susan Sarandon's in it. And the next day, I go to the Durham Athletic Park, and I'm walking up, and I'm like, holy, this is the park. This is the stadium. This is what I just watched. And I see what they meant about the excitement. So I worked there. Then I came back, and I worked briefly as a TV reporter for Channel 33, WYTV in Youngstown, but I didn't like broadcast TV. It was completely different than print media. You didn't tell stories. It was all visual. And I wasn't trained to do that. So I didn't like it. So I was looking, and then I got lucky and got hired by the Beacon Journal, and I was there ever since.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's how I got to where I am right now.
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so right before this, you were talking a little bit about how you're at Stowe Monroe Falls High School right now.
Yeah. This is my first year, and I always wanted to. It was just a great opportunity. Massillon was great. It was great. I always wanted to work, but I always wanted to get into a bigger district. And my wife works at Akron Children's Hospital in Summit County. I worked at the Beacon, and Summit County just felt like the place for me. So I'm glad I'm back there. But I loved my time at Massillon. Loved it.
Yeah, that's great. And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask is, what do you consider your biggest challenge as a writer?
Okay. My biggest challenge as a writer, this is interesting because I have so many friends and people and colleagues who will call me all the time and say, hey, I have a story, but I'm not a writer. And the first thing I say is, yes, you are. Everybody's a writer. Everybody's a writer. It's just you have to know how to put your story together to make it interesting enough to where an audience will want to read it. I always thought that writers were this. I mean, and you do have these particular writers like the Stephen Kings and the Neil Gaimans and, these type of people that they're just amazing writers and they're so creative. But majority of the writers are people who just, they love to write and they just kept writing and they kept writing and they kept learning how to tell a story. And so the biggest challenge for me was as a writer, was believing that I'm a writer, that I'm a professional writer, regardless of how many books I sell. I'm a professional writer. I was trained to do that. So that was the biggest hurdle. And even if you're not a trained or professional, or you don't have a degree in it, you're still a writer if you can create. So the biggest challenge for me, and I bet for other people, it's getting started and losing that self-doubt, and saying, I've got this great idea, great, this great. Oh, but I'm not a writer. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way.
Oh,
But
definitely. Yeah, I
yeah,
think that is the hardest thing,
yeah, so many
starting.
people think that they automatically are supposed to be a professional before they could start writing, and
Mhm.
that's not true. You just have to write, and then learn how to put everything together. But for me, the biggest challenge was the self-doubt. But the other thing was, once I get started, I could go in waves and waves and waves. But then if I get stopped, if something stops me, it's hard to get that momentum back.
Okay.
So like for me, I was working on my Marion Motley book and crushing it up to now. There's 21 chapters here, but there's not that many. I think I cut some chapters down, and so I think there's going to be like 18 chapters.
Uh,
But I'm up to like maybe chapter 12, and once I stopped, and what stopped me was going into the master's program, and that stopped my writing really abruptly. So now that I'm winding down and finishing that master's program, I'm picking this back up because the timing right now is very important, and we'll talk about that later. But the timing is important for me to finish this. So that's one of the that's the biggest challenge for me. Also, I talk about things interrupting you. Um, it's different when I'm on deadline, like when I'm news writing or when I was a sports writer. There was never any. I loved the competition of writing, like covering things and being on deadline, because I was a competitive person as a sports writer. I loved being on deadline. Like I love that deadline writing. It because you were battling other writers from the Plain Dealer, from the Elyria Chronicle Telegram, from the Lorraine Journal, from I'm trying to think what the other ones out east, but all of those newspapers were covering the same Indians games, same Cavs games. So it was fun to try to figure out what angle I was going to use that nobody else was going to use. Because I mean, you've probably seen this, but like, let's say LeBron or somebody has a great game. Everybody is going to get that same quote. ESPN is going to get the same quote. Channel 3 is going to get the same quote. Fox 8. But I used to wait until everybody left, and then I'd come back and say, "Hey, LeBron, I have one other question." And then I'd say, "Hey, remember in the fourth quarter, this is like, yeah, well, do it." And so now my whole story is completely different than what they all left with. And so that was the fun. That was what was fun for me.
nice.
Writing books and things like that, it's different because you have a lot more time. And when you have that time, there's so many things that can get in the way of that.
Yeah, that makes sense, definitely, especially working on a master's program.
Yes.
That's very time consuming.
So I hope that helped people, but everybody's a writer, just write.
Do you have a suggestion for like students who want to write and just don't know how to get started?
Yeah, I would say don't see here. This is one thing that's very important. If you're just writing, if you're writing, let's not say you're writing for academics. You know, an essay or something. You're just
Mhm.
writing because you want to do creative writing. Man, like you do put yourself out there, and you're very vulnerable because you want to write how you feel. I always tell my students, if you write honest, that's the best writing you could do, because it's going to relate to somebody's going to relate to it. Somebody's going to relate to you being honest about what you're writing. But when you but on the same side, you're going to make yourself vulnerable because you're exposing yourself. And I think that especially young people with so many other stresses and things like that, they're afraid to do that. So I think teachers like me, I would always encourage that. And I would always make sure that my students knew that you have to respect everybody's writing and everybody's perspective, because your story is 1 in a million, just like somebody else's story is 1 in a million, because your perspectives are very, very, very unique.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell them to write from that uniqueness, whatever it is. So when I teach kids that, they get more excited about writing. That like, I'll have kids that'll come after class or in between their classes, going to a different class and say, Mr. Morgan, look, I was writing this last period, and I want you to check this out, and that's gets me excited, because now they're excited about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what is behind you?
Oh, okay. Yes. So this is what this is. So I try to break down. So when I was doing my Motley chapters, I had to figure out how I was going to put it all together. And actually, how about if I go back and talk about why I have some of these colors? Because everybody, when you're, if you've in English class, hopefully you've learned about the story elements. And a lot of people think this, they think that like writers make up these things. No, there's a formula. There's a formula for writing books and films. There's a formula. And in writing, we know this, from English class, you have your 5 story elements. You have your exposition, which is your beginning. And then you have your rising action, where all the conflict happens. And then you have your climax, and then you have your falling action, and then you have your resolution. So every story has that. Even if, we were talking about off tape, we were talking about The Moth, Radio Hour, and StoryCorps. Even a story that's 3 minutes long still has those 5 story elements. It has the beginning, the exposition. It'll have some type of conflict that the character is going to experience, because if you don't have any conflict, you cannot have a story without conflict. If there's no conflict, then you're just reading informational text. You're not reading a story. So you have to have that conflict, that rising action. Then you have to have the climax, where everything comes together, and then you have your falling action and your resolution. So every story has that, even if it's in such a small space of a 3-minute period or 5-minute period. So those story elements are always in a story. And in those story elements, you have character development. So you'll have a character, like, and I'll kind of throw in the Wizard of Oz, because I wanted to talk about that. And then I'll get back to this, because this I have to kind of explain some other stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So your character, so when you hear a lot of people talk about somebody's character arc or their character development, okay, so that character is going to go through those story elements, and as that character goes through those story elements, that character has to change. So however the character was at the beginning has to be different at the end, and all that happens throughout those story elements creates that character arc. So like, for instance, you'll watch a movie. I always tell this story. So this is a perfect example. So like the housewife who turns into a vigilante. Okay, so at the beginning of the film, she's this, this mom that works at home, and then her husband works in the office, and then the first couple minutes of a movie, he gets blown up, and boom, that's scene. And then act 2 comes, and then they fade to black, and then act 2, the 2 detectives are in her kitchen, and they have a blanket over her, and she's like, and they're asking her, well, what happened? And she's like, I don't know. And was everything normal? Yes. And are you sure? Can you remember anything else? No. Oh, wait, there was a van parked outside before he left for work. That's what happens, right?
Yes.
So the police find out that her husband was this racketeer guy, and he's got $12 million hidden, and they want to find it. So now they're coming after her and her daughter. And now now the mom is starting to go to shooting classes, and she's bringing the daughter, and they got Uzis, right?
Sounds right.
Yes, it's every movie. And then the climax is They come after her. Well, now she's different. She knows how to shoot a gun, and her daughter does too. You know, that's the character development, right? And then all of the story elements help change that character. So with that, I'll kind of shift into something that was kind of interesting about the hero's journey. I don't know if anybody's out there. My aunt, if she's out there and she knows about the hero's journey, but now, do you know about the hero's journey?
No.
Okay, so this is kind of interesting. So
Okay.
I wrote this up. Can you tell this is just my little circle? Okay, it's a circle, and this is the hero's journey. Now I'm going to explain this to you, and this will make so much sense. And then as I explain this, I want you to think about some of the movies that you've ever watched and if it follows this, right?
Okay.
So it's called the hero's journey, and Joseph Campbell, this goes back to the monolith, like years and thousand years ago. Characters go through this hero's journey. So it's almost like a clock. So at 12 o'clock, it's status quo. So the character is just who that character is. And then 1 o'clock, it's called Call to Adventure. So in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's call to adventure is the fact that no one ever listens to her. Like, they're all doing farming work. Nobody's listening to her. She's like, and Annie M says, Dorothy, just go find something to do, right? And she says, so then she floats off, and she says, why won't anybody listen to me? I wish there was a place that, and she starts singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, right? Okay.
If I can remember.
What's that? You remember
if I remember
that?
the movie correctly.
Okay, she starts singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Okay, because she's saying there's got to be a place that's better than this. So 2 o'clock is assistance. So every movie, so in every story, the character has some type of call to adventure. And then 2 o'clock is the assistance. There's always somebody there, like in I've never seen this movie, and I'm sorry to say this, but Hunger Games. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Okay. I think Katniss, right? Is that the main character?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Katniss gets some assistance. Is it it's a funny name person, right?
There's PETA.
Okay, is that her sister or no?
No, her sister.
Frodo, no.
That's the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, that's Lord of the Rings. Oh no,
Primrose.
What is it?
Primrose?
Yes, she gets some kind of assistance from somebody. All right. So then you go to, now if you look at this part, the ordinary world is where the character is. And then at 3 o'clock, it's called the departure. So that character departs into the special world. So with Dorothy, she departs from Kansas. And if you remember, she's in that tornado and it's spinning around. She's in the house. Do you remember that?
Barely, but yeah.
Okay. The house is spinning. It got caught into a tornado and it lands. And then as she walks through the house and opens the door, then the movie goes from black and white to color. She's in the special world now. Now, if you think about all the other movies you watch, every character goes into some type of special world.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4 o'clock is the trials. So everything that happens. So with the Wizard of Oz, 4 o'clock is Dorothy trying to get to see the wizard. And as she goes, she meets the Scarecrow. She meets the Tin Man. She meets the Lion. And every time she meets somebody, the witch is always doing something to try to stop her from getting to Oz. So 5 o'clock is called the approach.
Okay.
Every movie has the approach where this is where you're starting to get to 6 o'clock, the crisis, the climax. And 6 o'clock for Dorothy is when she finally meets the witch in the castle. They come face to face. She's being chased by guards on one way and guards on the other, and the witch is right there, and Dorothy is right there, and the Scarecrow and everybody's right there. And then the witch grabs some fire from a candle and throws it at the Scarecrow, catches him on fire. Dorothy grabs a bucket of water and throws it to put the fire out, but she throws the water on the witch and she starts melting and she starts dying. She's like, oh, my little pretty, why did you do this? That's the climax. That's the crisis. So 7 o'clock is the treasure. Now, usually after the character defeats that battle, they usually get some kind of prize or a treasure. Well, Dorothy's treasure was the broomstick, because the Wizard of Oz said, for you to get home, you have to get the broomstick of the Wicked Witch that shows that she's dead. She got that. That was the treasure.
Huh.
8 o'clock is called the result. So the result of Dorothy killing the witch and getting the treasure is that she's able to get back home. So 9 o'clock is called the return, or it's called, the return. So Dorothy gets to the castle and she goes, I want to go home. And he says, you know what? You always could go home. You just needed to click your heels 3 times. So she clicks her heels 3 times. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. And the movie is in color. And then she returns to her ordinary world and it goes back into black and white. Hmm. And then 10 o'clock is, it's everything comes back into place. So she wakes up and they're like, Dorothy, you were knocked out from the tornado. And she's like, oh, you were there and you were there and you were there. And 11 o'clock, they tie, it's called the resolution, they tie it all up. And she says, oh, and they said, Dorothy, hush, 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 hush. She says, well, I don't care, because 12 o'clock, because there's no place like home. Those are the last 5 lines of the movie. So Dorothy, in her hero's journey, she went from hating where she lived, wanting to go somewhere else, to finally realizing that really home is where she always needed to be. And she figured that out. Right. So that's her whole hero's journey. That's Katniss, maybe?
Katniss.
Is that the character?
Yeah, Hunger Games.
What's the main character in Lord of the Rings?
That's Frodo, right?
Okay, Frodo probably went through the same. That's not my cup of tea, that genre. So that's, can you hear my dog?
Just barely.
My wife is home from work. So the heroes are,
like any Marvel movie comes to mind too, I feel like.
Yeah, so I mean, think about it. Think about every character. Peter Parker, Captain America. They all started out that way, changed, and they become, now those kind of Marvel, those are series. They can make different plots and things like that. But yeah, that's how all those characters start out. So now that's kind of different from what I write, because I've never written a book that was fiction, because my background is as a sports writer and as a journalist. So I could take facts or people's stories, people's actual stories. Like, that's why I wrote the book, the biography on LeBron James and Coach Tressel and Kelly Pavlik, who was a boxer from Youngstown. That's just my skill, to take actual facts and then write about that and write a story. So with that, I'm doing my Marion Motley book, but I still have to follow those story elements and Marion Motley's character development. And so what I did was, I had to color code. So once I broke down what type of chapters or where chapters, like I have one chapter, who was Marion Motley? 1968, bittersweet, what was going on in 68? And then I have a color, I think it's maroon. Everything in maroon is conflict. So it was going to have to go into basically act 2 of my book. All the conflict had to be in the rising action part of the book. So anywhere where there was burgundy, that was conflict. Anywhere there was pink, there was plot twist. And there's not that many of that. The green, I always had as the exposition, because it's just the green, it's the green light, it's getting started. So and usually there's only one green, because you can only, basically you're really only having one beginning.
Okay.
And then the climax was in brown, falling action is in yellow, resolution is in blue. So I had to color code a lot of the chapters. But then what happens is all of that, probably like that looks like chaos, but then it was kind of crunched and crunched and crunched until it got into a more like it made more sense.
Okay.
But yeah, like something like that, I have to look, because his story has to flow in along with the story elements, and it's a historical figure, so I can't I can't really embellish anything. So that's the hardest part, is you've got to be true to the story,
Yeah, of course.
and so yeah, but this was very important, because without that, I mean, your story is completely lost.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great visualization.
Yeah, and then you can't see it, but with that, and I always have my story elements over here. I mean, I know them, but it's just I always have them to make sure I know where I could move something.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about your story elements?
Yeah, well, actually, the story elements and the story maps are basically the same, because you're trying to follow those five elements. Like I say, they're in every film. Now I used to, I would talk to the kids about this. In movies, those story elements are still captured, but they're captured in 3 acts.
Okay.
So, like, for instance, in every movie, the first act usually lasts about maybe 5 or 7 minutes. And you can probably tell when you watch a movie when the first act ends and when the second act starts, because the first act is basically your exposition, the characters, where the setting, and then usually in that first 5 minutes, something drastic happens to the character that makes that character have to do something. So when that happens, like I was explaining to you, the husband gets blown up. Okay, Act 1 ends. That's the end of Act 1. And usually they'll fade to black and then they'll go to a new scene. Act 2 has started then. And Act 2 is usually way longer, because it has all of the conflict, all of the subplots, all of that. So in a movie, those are way longer. And then you have the Act 3, which has the falling action and the resolution. So that's the difference. And I'm not a film guy, but I've taken film classes, and I have friends who are filmmakers, and that's how that's how you make a film, in the 3 acts. You just incorporate those story elements, but they're compacted in longer parts.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be thinking of that next time I watch a movie.
Yeah, when you watch a movie, you'll know when the first act is over. Yeah, because something's going to happen to the main character, something drastic. Usually it happens right away. So
yeah, that makes sense. So right now you're working on the Marion Motley Story.
Yes.
And you were telling me a little bit before this presentation about the Football Hall of Fame and the statue. Would you be able to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, see, so the importance of Marion Motley is this. So it kind of goes back. So from 1913, I'm not sure, I have to look back, from 1913 to about 1944, there were a few, or maybe 1930. Maybe it was 1939 or something like that. I have to look it up. But there were 1 or 2 blacks who played football. But then when professional football started, owners got together and said, after this last black player's contract is up, we won't sign any more black players to play professional football. So there was this kind of unspoken code among professional owners that no black player, they weren't going to sign any black players. Well, in 1946, Paul Brown, who coached at Massillon, and he was the first coach of the Cleveland Browns, he said, no, if you want me to coach the Cleveland Browns, you're going to let me sign who I want to sign. So he signed Marion Motley and Bill Willis. Now, they were in a league. They started a new league called the All-America League. The NFL was already started. They wouldn't sign any black players either. So there were 2 black players who were signed in the NFL and 2 black players in the AAFC, which was Motley and Willis.
Okay.
So they broke the color barrier a year before Jackie Robinson. It's interesting because Branch Rickey, who signed Jackie Robinson, looked at what was happening in 46, and he saw that if people like Marion Motley and Bill Willis, if they could handle the racism and the Jim Crow laws in a sport that wasn't as popular as baseball, Branch Rickey felt, if I could get a guy who was smart, patient, had the right temperament to handle racism, then this could work in baseball, which baseball was the all-American sport. So Motley helped open the door for Jackie Robinson, and we have him on audio speaking about that, and in our film, and I'll tell you about that. But in a lot of the audio that we have, it's very eerie to listen to Marion Motley talk, because he's since passed, but just to hear him talk about that time period, it's just phenomenal. But that opened the door for Jackie Robinson. So the book is basically a story about Motley's impact on American sports and opening the door for so many other African-American athletes in a time period in the 40s when the United States had Jim Crow laws, which wouldn't allow blacks anywhere in the South. And it's that story about how he was able to overcome that and help open the door for so many other athletes. And the fact that he's from Canton, Ohio, but a lot of people don't know the impact of what he did. And he's in the Hall of Fame. He was only the second African-American to be inducted into the Hall of Fame at the time. In 68, he was only the second. So the book tells that story. And what's so exciting is that our film, it's called Lines Broken, the Marion Motley Story. It's going to air on PBS, premiere tonight at 10 o'clock on PBS Western Reserve. So if you're up at 10 o'clock, please tune in to PBS Fusion or Western Reserve, but you'll be able to watch it tonight at 10 o'clock. And it's a great film. It's a great film.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. And the book, and so the book, we want to, our goal is to, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to get it into schools to teach, whether school districts use it in their English language arts or history or that type of atmosphere, but they could use it for civil rights. They could use it for all kinds of things, but I'm going to be writing a lesson plan and a curriculum for a unit to be taught in schools to go along with the book.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm really excited for that.
I'm excited. Thank you. It's awesome. It's awesome. And what's so great is the Hall of Fame has been so great in backing this because they understand the importance of Marion Motley and the fact that he's a Northeast Ohio guy. Like, I think somebody said this in the film. They said, if Marion Motley was in New York, and there would be a highway named after him or a building named after him, like Jackie Robinson. But because he's from Northeast Ohio, people have just completely forgotten or didn't understand the impact that Marion Motley had. And the fact that, he had to be very, very, he even says this, he said, if he or Bill Willis ever fought or did anything like that, he says, we would have set Negroes back another 10 years. as it related to sports and having more blacks allowed to sign. Had they not handled themselves in a classy, professional manner, being kicked and bitten and hands stepped on with cleats and death threats, had they not handled that with class and dignity, it might have been another decade or two before blacks were even allowed to sign with NFL teams.
Yeah, thank you for, sharing that story. I look forward to that book coming out. And you said there was just a ribbon cutting ceremony.
Oh yeah, we had a groundbreaking ceremony this past Friday. We were, so when this whole film project started, a group of us, the producer, I'm one of the producers, director, the writer, we had a couple other guys who were interested in raising money for a statue to be built at the Hall of Fame as people come into the Hall of Fame, to show, hey, here's one of Canton's own who's in the Hall of Fame and who went through some, very, very rough periods to make it where he was. So we raised money for about a year and a half, and we finally got over our goal. And so we had a groundbreaking ceremony, and we had a lot of the media there. Fox 8 was there. We had, local newspaper, the president of the Hall of Fame, David Baker, and the mayor of Canton, along with a lot of Marion Motley's family who came from Cleveland. I think there were about 20 of them. And they were all lined up with the shovels. And so I think tentatively the statue is supposed to be done by November or December of this year, which is phenomenal, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah. And you know what? We were lucky. We got a substantial, what pushed us over the edge financially was a donation by Josh McDaniels. Now, he played at McKinley, and he's now the offensive coordinator. He's been the offensive coordinator at the New England Patriots for the last, I don't know, he basically ran the Patriots offense for all of those Super Bowls, and he worked hand in hand with Tom Brady, and he's still there. He gave us that last push to put us over. And so it was great to have somebody of that stature. And he's say young relative to me. He's a young guy, but with a lot of success, but he didn't forget where he came from. And so for him to step up like that and the Hall of Fame, we couldn't be more thankful of the Hall of Fame for being behind this 1000%.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to make sure there's enough time in case anyone else wants to ask questions. I know you said you think your aunt is on.
Oh, I was just joking because I don't know who it is, but when you said there's one person, usually my mom's like, what show you gonna be on? I gotta make sure I catch it. So I just thought maybe it was one of my aunts.
So
I have no idea who it is.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
Yeah, unmute yourself and we'll give you $100. No, I have no idea who it is. But that's all I have. I mean, I appreciate you having me. Oh, that's okay. I appreciate you being here. I really do. No, typically I miss doing book signings. The Zooms have been completely different from what I'm used to. Everybody, obviously, but when you're like, I miss Borders. I miss Barnes and Noble. Like, I miss those. Right. Ev said, I'm not your aunt. Yeah, that's okay. We love you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Yes, but I do miss the book signings because you're in person. People can really talk to you and they could chat afterwards. But this is great. I mean, anytime
thank you so much.
Yeah. Anytime you could talk writing, and because like I said before, I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a detective, so I never thought I'd be doing this.
Yeah, that is a bit of a change of careers.
Absolutely. You know what's funny? You know what's interesting? I mean, and this is just me being real and honest. You know, when I'm out and about, my wife or we're out and about and we're talking, or somebody sees that I'm wearing a shirt and they ask me, oh, what are you doing? And I say, you know, I'm a teacher. They automatically assume that I teach phys ed. And then when I tell them that I'm an English teacher, like their heads explode. You know, they're like, yeah, yeah. Look at your face. Their heads explode like, what? They're like completely amazed. And and I get it. And I get it because, you know, there aren't a lot of teachers of color, period, in education, period. And there's far less people of color teaching English. And then there's even far less people of color teaching English who are male. So it is something that I take very seriously, because a lot of my students have told me that I have been their first Black teacher they've ever had.
Wow.
Yeah. At Massillon.
Huh.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. You don't think about that. And I'm not making it a race thing or anything like that. It's just, it's very interesting. There's just, you know, for some reason, there aren't a lot of people of color going into teaching, or they're just not in certain districts, I should say. And there definitely aren't that many Black males who teach English. So it's important for me that I do a great job of doing that and showing people that you could be an athlete, you could be a minority, you could come from crazy backgrounds. I mean, I was from a middle-class background, but I mean, you could do whatever. And but if you want to write, if you want to teach English, you can, because I'm a perfect example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure you're a role model for many, many students.
Well, I guess I am. I mean, you know, I take that seriously because I love I love young people. You know, my parents have taught me that. You know, we've always helped out in the community. My parents still do. And so that was something that was always in my family. Help out, go to church and hand out stuff. Go downtown and go to the parade and hand out stuff. Go help at the poll. You know, that was just something that I was taught to do my whole life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to, you know, present tonight.
My pleasure.
It was really, you know, inspirational, and I look forward to watching the documentary tonight.
You know what, Emily, if listen to me, if there's one thing you would do for me, I ask you, please stay up and watch this.
I will.
And then, okay, listen, will you have access to do you have your email on your phone?
I don't, but I can pull it up.
I want you to do this as soon as it's over. I just want you to say, I liked it, I didn't like it. So at 10:32, I better get a little thing that says bing.
Okay.
And it better be from you. I'm telling you. If not, I'm going to email you.
No, I'm so excited. Like I said, I didn't really know much about football, which, you know, is embarrassing that I really didn't know much.
No. That's completely understandable. And that's the great thing about the film too, is the fact that it's obviously the theme is sports, but there are other themes. There's the theme of racism and equality, and in Paul Brown's case, equality, because he didn't care what color you were. He cared that you had good character. So it will resonate with people who don't, because once you understand Marion Motley's story, the sports is just the vehicle to carry his story. And so you'll trust me, in that 30 minutes, you'll know everything you need to know about Marion Motley. And after that 30 minutes, you'll say to yourself, wow, I bet you any money tomorrow you'll be telling people, hey, come here. Hey, did you hear about Marion? You know who Marion Motley is? You'll be telling that story.
I'm sure. I know, and I'll have to visit the statue too.
Yeah,
Look forward to that as well. And like I said, you know, this is recorded, so we're going to send this to participants who couldn't be here tonight as well.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to you watching this and me receiving your email at 10:33.
Yes, thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. And thank you,
Okay.
participants as well.
Okay.
I'm going to send out a survey tomorrow.
Okay.
Keep an eye out
Okay.
for that.
You'll get fives. You'll get fives across the board. Don't worry.
So thank you again. I hope you all have
Okay.
a good night.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Take care, Emily. Bye-bye.
Bye.